Good evening, guys. Welcome to the Unfiltered Political Lens. Today we're taking a deep dive into one of the most important and misunderstood geopolitical conflicts in modern history, the story of Taiwan. How did this island become separated from mainland China? Was it always part of China, or did history take a different path? What role did imperial dynasties, European colonial powers, Japan, and the Chinese Civil War, the Cold War, and the United States all play in shaping the Taiwan we know today? And perhaps the biggest question of all, why does a conflict rooted in history continue to bring the world's most powerful nations to the edge of confrontation? Throughout this documentary, we'll trace Taiwan's story from its earliest indigenous civilizations to the European colonization, the Qing dynasty, Japanese role in the rise of Mao Zedong, Chiang Kai-shek's retreat to Taiwan, and the birth of two rival Chinese governments, Taiwan's transformation into a thriving democracy, and the growing tensions that continue to shape the global politics today. Our goal is to examine the historical events, the competing historical perspectives, and the major turning points that have made Taiwan one of the world's most strategically important places. This documentary is intended to provide an historical context rather than advocate for any one political position, and by the end, you'll have a much larger understanding of how history has shaped one of the most consequential geopolitical disputes of the modern era. For more than 70 years, one island has stood at the center of the most dangerous geopolitical disputes on Earth. Taiwan is home to more than 23 million people, one of the world's most advanced economies, and the global leader in manufacturing many of the world's most advanced semiconductor chips. Yet just 100 miles across the Taiwan Strait sits the People's Republic of China, whose government maintains that Taiwan is part of China and has stated that reunification remains a national objective. Every military exercise and every election, every diplomatic meeting and every naval patrol in the Taiwan Strait is watched closely by the governments around the world, because the consequences of a conflict there could extend far beyond East Asia. To understand today's tensions, we have to travel back thousands of years. Long before the arrival of imperial Chinese governments or European explorers, Taiwan was inhabited by the indigenous Austronesian peoples. Archaeological evidence suggests these communities lived on the island for thousands of years before written history documented Taiwan's existence. These indigenous societies had developed unique languages, traditions, trade networks, and cultures that stretched across islands throughout the Pacific Ocean. Many of the scholars believe Taiwan served as one of the major launching points for Austronesian migration into the Philippines, Indonesia, Polynesia, and even as far away as Madagascar. Now, for centuries, Taiwan remained largely outside of that control of Chinese imperial governments. While the Chinese fishermen and the traders occasionally crossed the Taiwan Strait, the island remained sparsely populated compared to mainland China. The Chinese dynasties generally viewed Taiwan as distant, difficult to govern, and often inhabited by peoples considered outside the administrative reach of the empire. Everything began changing during the age of exploration. In the 17th century, European colonial powers were searching for profitable trade routes and recognized Taiwan's strategic location between Japan, China, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Ocean. In 1624, the Dutch East India Company had established a colony in southern Taiwan, and their goal was to create a commercial hub connecting trade throughout Asia. Just 2 years later, Spain established settlements in northern Taiwan. The Dutch and Spanish competed for influence until the Dutch eventually forced Spain from the island. The Dutch introduced a new framing techniques, encouraged immigration from China's Fujian province, and transformed Taiwan into an important trading center. However, the European control would not last forever, and in 1662, Zhang Qinggong, better known in Western history as Kaxinga, arrived with thousands of soldiers loyal to the fallen Ming dynasty. After defeating the Dutch, Kaxinga established his own kingdom on Taiwan, and his objective was not merely to govern the island, but to use Taiwan as a base from which he hoped to reclaim mainland China from the newly established Qing dynasty. And although Kaxinga's kingdom survived only a little more than 20 years, it had permanently linked Taiwan's history with the political struggles unfolding across mainland China. In 1683, Qing force defeated Kaxinga's descendants and incorporated Taiwan into the Qing Empire. Even then, Qing officials often considered Taiwan a frontier territory rather than a fully integrated province. Han Chinese migration increased significantly, especially from the Fujian and Guangdong, which gradually transforming the island's demographics, while the indigenous communities continued living throughout Taiwan's mountainous interior. Then the next major turning point came in 1895. China had just lost the First Sino-Japanese War under the Treaty of Shimonoseki. The Qing dynasty ceded Taiwan to Japan, and this point had marked the first time Taiwan formally left Chinese rule through an international treaty. The Japanese colonial rule would last 50 years and fundamentally reshape Taiwan society. Japan had also invested heavily in railroads, ports, highways, schools, hospitals, sanitation systems, and its public infrastructure. Agriculture production expanded and industry modernized, and literacy had increased substantially. Yet the colonial rule also brought strict political control, and the resistance movements were often suppressed, and many of the Taiwanese lived under an authoritarian colonial administration. Taiwan had experienced modernization and repression simultaneously. And when World War II ended in 1945, the Japanese surrendered to the Allied powers, and the administration of Taiwan had transformed to the Republic of China, led by Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang, commonly known as the Nationalist Party. Now, at first, many Taiwanese celebrated the end of the Japanese rule, but however, optimism quickly had faded, and corruption, inflation, and administrative inefficiency and its economic hardships had spread under the new government. These frustrations exploded on February 28, 1947. What began as a confrontation between the government agents and a woman selling untaxed cigarettes had quickly escalated into widespread protests against government corruption and abuse. The demonstrations had spread throughout Taiwan, with many of the citizens demanding reforms and a greater accountability. The nationalist government responded with military force. Thousands of civilians were killed during this uprising, and what became known as the February 28th incident, or the 2/28 incident. The historians had regarded this event as one of the defining tragedies in our modern Taiwanese history. It also marked the beginning of decades of authoritarian rule under the Kuomintang. Now, at the very same time, another conflict was determining the future of mainland China itself. That conflict would ultimately reshape Taiwan's destiny more than any other event in modern history. The Chinese Civil War had begun decades earlier, following the collapse of the Qing dynasty in 1911. China had entered a period of political instability as competing factions had struggled for power. Two of the groups would eventually emerge as the dominant rival. One was the Kuomintang, or the Nationalist Party, led by Chiang Kai-shek. The other was the Chinese Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong. Although both groups had initially cooperated at times, especially during Japan's invasion of China in the 1930s and throughout World War II, their ideological differences never disappeared. Once Japan surrendered in 1945, the fragile alliance had collapsed, and the Chinese Civil War resumed with even greater intensity. Over the next 4 years, the communist forces steadily gained the upper hand. Mao's army attracted significant support in many rural areas through the land reform policies and the disciplined military organizations, while Chiang Kai-shek's government had struggled with inflation, corruption, and a declining public confidence. Only one city after another fell to the communist control. Let me rephrase that. Only one city had fell to communist control. And by 1949, it had become clear that the nationalist government could no longer hold mainland China. On October 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong stood in Beijing and proclaimed the founding of the People's Republic of China. Meanwhile, Chiang Kai-shek and approximately 2 million soldiers, government officials, scholars, and business leaders and civilians fled across the Taiwan Strait to the island of Taiwan. They transported the portions of China's national treasury, priceless imperial artifacts, and important government records in the institutions of the Republic of China. Taipei became the temporary capital of the Republic of China, while Beijing became the capital of the People's Republic of China. Now, this moment lies at the heart of today's dispute. The communist government in Beijing maintained that it was now the sole legitimate government of all of China, including Taiwan. The Republic of China's government in Taipei argued that it remained the lawful government of China despite losing control of the mainland. In other words, the Chinese Civil War never officially ended with a peace treaty. Instead, it froze across the Taiwan Strait, leaving two separate governments with competing claims that continue to influence international politics even today. The outbreak of the Korean War in the 1950s dramatically had changed Taiwan's future. Concerned about the spread of communism in Asia and the United States sent the 7th Fleet into Taiwan Strait. The deployment effectively prevented either side from launching a major invasion of Taiwan. American military support became a critical security guarantee for Beijing, and it also represented foreign interference in what Chinese leaders consider an internal matter. Now, throughout the 1950s, the tensions escalated repeatedly. During the first and second Taiwan Strait crises, Chinese forces had shelled offshore islands controlled by Taiwan, including the Kinmen and Matsu. The United States had reinforced its military commitments to Taiwan, and the fears grew that the regional conflict could escalate into a direct confrontation between the two nuclear powers. Fortunately, diplomacy and deterrence prevented a wider war, but the Taiwan Strait had become one of the Cold War's most dangerous flashpoints. Now, inside Taiwan, Chiang Kai-shek had imposed martial law. The political opposition was prohibited, strict censorship was enforced, and thousands of individuals accused of opposing the government were imprisoned or executed during what became known as the White Terror. Now, for nearly 4 decades, Taiwan remained under one of the longest periods of martial law in modern history. While the government justified these measures as necessary to defend against communist threats, many of historians view this period as one of significant political repression. And despite authoritarian rule, Taiwan's economy began expanding rapidly. Beginning in the 1960s, the government reforms, investments in education, the export-oriented manufacturing, and the support from the international markets had fueled extraordinary economic growth. This period became known as the Taiwan Miracle. Factories producing electronics and machinery and consumer goods all transformed Taiwan into one of Asia's leading industrial economies. Rising incomes, improved education, and the expanding infrastructure also created a prosperous middle class. The diplomatic recognition, however, was shifting toward Beijing. In 1971, the United Nations voted to transfer China's seat from the Republic of China to the People's Republic of China. This decision fundamentally altered Taiwan's international standing, and most countries gradually established diplomatic relations with Beijing rather than Taipei. In 1979, the United States had formally recognized the People's Republic of China as the government of China, while ending official diplomatic recognition of Taiwan. However, the relationships between the United States and Taiwan did not disappear. Congress did pass the Taiwan Relations Act, which established unofficial relations and authorized continued defense arms sales to Taiwan itself. And the act also stated that any attempt to determine Taiwan's future through non-peaceful means would be considered a matter of grave concern to the United States. This legislation remains one of the cornerstones of the U.S.-Taiwan relations today. By the late 1980s, Taiwan had begun to undergo profound political transformations. Martial law was lifted in 1987. The opposition political parties became legal restrictions on the free speech gradually disappeared, and democratic reforms had accelerated. The citizens gained greater freedoms to recognize or organize politically, criticize their governments, and participate in competitive elections. Taiwan's transition from authoritarian rule to democracy was widely regarded as one of the most successful democratic transformations in Asia. In 1996, Taiwan also held its first direct presidential election. Beijing viewed this development with concerns, fearing that the democratic elections could strengthen support for permanent separation from the mainland China. In an effort to influence the public opinion, China had conducted missile tests and military exercises near Taiwan. The United States had responded by deploying aircraft carriers to the region, demonstrating its commitment to maintaining stability in the Taiwan Strait. The crisis eventually subsided, but it underscored how sensitive Taiwan's political future had become. And as Taiwan's democracy matured, the public opinion evolved. Surveys were conducted over many years, which have generally found that increasing numbers of residents identify primarily as Taiwanese, rather than exclusively Chinese. The younger generations have grown up under Taiwan's democratic institutions, educational systems, and political culture. But at the same time, many of the families continue to maintain culture, linguistics, and historical ties with mainland China. Taiwan society, therefore, reflects a complex blend of both identities shaped by centuries of shared history and decades of separated political developments. Economically, Taiwan and mainland China became increasingly interconnected as well. Taiwanese businesses had invested billions of dollars in factories across mainland China, and trade between the two sides were expanded dramatically. Millions of people had traveled across the Taiwan Strait for business, tourism, education, and family visits. But these economic relationships had created mutual benefit, but also had generated debate within Taiwan over the risk of becoming too economically dependent on the mainland. One industry elevated Taiwan's global importance beyond almost any other nation of comparable size: semiconductors. The Taiwanese companies became leaders in manufacturing the world's most advanced computer chips. These semiconductors power smartphones, automobiles, medical equipment, artificial intelligence systems, communication infrastructure, and advanced military technologies. Because so much of the world's semiconductor production depends on Taiwan, analysts frequently describe the island as indispensable to the modern global economy. During the 21st century, China's military capabilities expanded significantly, and the People's Liberation Army modernized its Navy, Air Force, missile forces, cyber capabilities, and amphibious operations. Military aircraft and naval vessels began operating around Taiwan with an increasing frequency, while the large-scale military exercises also demonstrated China's growing capabilities. The Chinese leaders consistently reiterated that they preferred peaceful reunification, but stated that they had not ruled out the use of force under certain circumstances. The United States has continued a policy often described as strategic ambiguity. Washington has acknowledged the One China policy while maintaining unofficial relations with Taiwan, supporting Taiwan's ability to defend itself, and encouraging the peaceful resolutions of differences. Successive American administrations have emphasized the importance of maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait while avoiding unilateral changes to the status quo by either side. And today, Taiwan functions with its own elected government, military, constitution, judicial system, and passport currency and democratic institutions. At the same time, the People's Republic of China continues to regard Taiwan as part of China under its constitutional framework and One China principle. This difference in political and legal perspectives remains the foundation of one of the world's most enduring geopolitical disputes. Now you might ask, why does Taiwan matter so much? Well, geography provides part of the answer. Taiwan sits along major shipping lanes that connect Northeast Asia with the rest of the world. Any disruption to those routes could affect the global trade. Taiwan's semiconductor industry is another critical factor, supplying the advanced chips that are essential to countless industries. Finally, Taiwan occupies a strategically significant position within the Western Pacific, making it an important consideration in the security planning of multiple nations. The supporters of Beijing also position generally, they argue that Taiwan has historically been part of China and that the reunification would complete the unresolved outcome of the Chinese Civil War. Now, others argue that Taiwan, decades of separated governance, democratic development, and the distinct political identity mean that its future should be determined peacefully by the people living on the island. These differing historical interpretations continue to shape diplomatic negotiations, the security policies, as well as international relations. Now, regardless of where one stands politically, one fact remains clear that Taiwan's history is extraordinarily complex. It is a story of indigenous civilizations, European colonization, imperial dynasties, Japanese rule, civil war, authoritarian government, democratic transformations, and economic innovation, and competing visions of sovereignty. Understanding that history is essential for understanding why Taiwan remains one of the world's most closely watched geopolitical flashpoints. History does not merely explain the past, it shapes the present and influences the future. Every military exercise and diplomatic meeting, election, and policy decisions involving Taiwan is connected to the events that unfolded centuries ago. As the world continues navigating an era of renewed great power competition, Taiwan's future will remain one of the defining questions of international politics. Whether the coming decades are remembered for peaceful dialogue or heightened confrontation, it all will depend on decisions made by the leaders on all sides, as well as continued efforts to reduce the tensions and to preserve stability. I want to thank you for watching the Unfiltered Political Lens. We truly appreciate you taking the time to join us as we explore the history, politics, and global events shaping our world. If you found this documentary informative, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe so you never miss future deep dives or our documentaries and breaking geopolitical analysis. We appreciate you being here and look forward to seeing you in the coming episode. And until next time, as always, we'll see you in the next one. Peace.